The human warship disappeared at 3:40 hours, and Sub-Commander Thale spent 9 hours learning what silence felt like when it was deliberate. He had led the Resk hunting fleet into the Verath Drift with 37 ships and a contact profile that should have made the chase simple. One human vessel, a Ghost-class cruiser the Terran fleet registers called a stealth hull, not a dreadnought, not a carrier, not the kind of ship that warranted the 11-day transit to reach this sector. The Dominion Council had issued the intercept order in tones that implied ease. The pale meridian, they said, was running. A lone ship in Resk space, outside any Terran patrol corridor without escort. It had to be running. At 3:39 hours, Thale's forward sensor array had a clean contact. The human cruiser at 83,000 kilometers, its drive signature briefly visible when it crossed a thermal band in the drift's outer gas layer. He had ordered a course intercept. Weapons armed. Fleet formation tightening. At 3:40, the contact vanished. Not disappeared the way a ship disappears when it dies, no debris, no residual energy, no thermal scar. It simply stopped being there, the way a sharp thing stops cutting when it is put away. The sensor arrays returned clean readings. The fleet's passive grid showed nothing. Thale ordered a full active sweep, the kind that announced the hunter's position to everything in the sector, and the sweep returned 37 Resk ships and empty space. The pale meridian was gone. Reacquisition, he asked. His sensor chief, Karath, took 7 full seconds to answer. Negative, no signature within range. No drive bloom, no hull resonance, no, she stopped. No anything, Sub-Commander. It's as if it was never there. Thale stood at the command rail and looked at the empty display. 37 ships, 312 crew, hunting something that had decided not to be found. The Resk were the oldest apex hunters in the cluster, tracking prey through the deep dark since before humanity had learned to sail on water. The Dominion's naval doctrine was built on 2 pillars: identify your prey and never let it reset the engagement. The prey never controlled the hunt. He ordered the fleet to hold position and went to work. For the first 3 hours, Thale tried everything the doctrine prescribed. Passive grid at maximum range, overlapping sensor fields between ships, a slow expansion spiral centered on the last known contact point. The drift worked against him. The gas clouds scattered passive returns, made thermal traces into ghosts, turned the fleet's sensor net into a tool that caught noise and called it data. By hour 2, he had 4 possible contact traces. By hour 3, all 4 had resolved into gas column distortions and the residual bloom of his own active sweep. At 6:12, Karath flagged an anomaly. Sub-Commander, there's a gravitational irregularity at bearing 274 Mark 18, small, consistent with a hull mass shadow. He looked at the bearing. It placed the anomaly 91,000 kilometers to their port quarter, behind the fleet's formation, not ahead of it, not where prey runs. When did it appear? I don't know. I can't determine when it appeared. It may have been there since before the contact vanished. Thale committed the bearing to memory and said nothing aloud. He filed it internally as the first thing that had not fit the hunt's expected shape, and there were rules in Resk doctrine about things that did not fit expected shapes. The rule was, stop assuming you understand the terrain. He spent the next 2 hours constructing a new model. By hour 5, the model had a shape he did not like. The pale meridian had crossed the thermal band at exactly the point in its transit where the Resk fleet's formation would produce its shortest sensor overlap gap, a gap of 11 seconds during a heading shift, when 2 of Thale's trailing ships swung to their new bearing and left a narrow cone of reduced sensitivity. The gap was small. It was the kind of gap that a ship running blind might stumble into by chance. A ship running blind would not have been on a heading that intersected that cone at that precise moment. He ran the geometry 4 times. The result did not change. The pale meridian had not been crossing the thermal band randomly. It had been in that gap for a reason. By hour 6, Thale understood that he was not the hunter. He did not share this conclusion with his fleet. He stood at the command rail and watched the empty displays and revised his thinking about every decision he had made since the contact vanished. The active sweep, which had announced his fleet's position to the entire sector. The expansion spiral, which had held his ships in a predictable geometric pattern for 3 hours. The fleet's current formation, 37 hulls in a defensive cluster, sensors pointed outward, weapons tracking nothing, sitting exactly where a ship that had been watching them for 9 hours would know they would be. "All stop," he said. The fleet halted. "Passive sensors only, minimum emissions." He looked at Verath. "Do not sweep, do not ping." "Watch." Verath's expression carried the particular flatness of a professional who has been asked to do something that violates instinct but cannot argue with the reasoning behind it. She nodded and turned to her station. They waited. At hour 8, Verath said quietly, "Sub-Commander, I have a single return bearing 031 Mark 6. Duration," she paused, 2 seconds. "Hull resonance consistent with a Terran Ghost-class cruiser." The bearing was 12,000 kilometers off the fleet's starboard bow, ahead of them, precisely where the expansion spiral would have taken his fleet if he had continued the standard pattern. "It moved," Thale said. "Yes." "To be in front of us." A pause, "Yes." He stayed with that for a long moment. Something in the Resk hunting instinct, old, reliable, the thing that had made his species feared across 400 years of expansion, went quiet in a way he had never felt it go quiet before. It was not caution. It was recognition. The recognition that comes when a predator finds itself in terrain it did not choose and realizes the terrain was chosen for it. "Transmit on the contact bearing," he said. "Low band, tight beam. Identification only." Verath turned from her station. "Sub-Commander, doctrine says we fire on confirmed." "We have been here 9 hours. If the pale meridian intended to fire, it has had 9 hours to do so. Transmit identification." He waited 4 seconds for argument. None came. Verath transmitted. The response arrived 40 seconds later. 11 words, no formatting, tight beam return. "This is ISF Pale Meridian. Follow the heading. Bring your fleet." A heading followed. It pointed deeper into the drift, into a region of dense gas and poor sensor resolution that the Resk formation charts marked as navigation restricted. Thale read the transmission twice. Then he read it a third time, because 11 words was not how ships communicated combat intentions, and because the heading given would take his fleet through 30 kilometers of near-blind transit, and because no prey in the history of Resk naval operations had ever stopped running and sent the hunters a direction to follow. He sat with the weight of it. 2 interpretations. The first, the pale meridian was damaged, its crew desperate, transmitting a surrender heading in a form that preserved some dignity. The second, the ship was not desperate at all, and the heading was an invitation to something Thale had not yet fully modeled. He thought about the thermal band, the 11-second sensor gap, the hull mass shadow at the port quarter bearing, already behind his fleet before the main contact vanished. He thought about a Ghost-class cruiser that had spent 9 hours in his fleet's sensor shadow without being detected, that had appeared exactly twice, once when it wanted to be seen, and once to confirm it was still watching. He thought about prey that runs. He input the heading. The transit took 22 minutes. The fleet moved through gas columns thick enough to drop their sensor range to 800 kilometers, their formation tightening by instinct as the passive returns blurred into static. Thale watched the navigation display and said nothing. His weapons officers held their stations without orders. The 37 ships of the Resk hunting fleet moved in silence through a corridor they had not chosen, following a heading given to them by the ship they had been sent to destroy. They cleared the gas column at 13:04 hours. The Terran fleet was already there. Not a small escort force, not a patrol element that had been rerouted to intercept. 340 warships in full combat formation, dreadnoughts at the center, destroyer screens spread across 200,000 kilometers of open space, carrier elements with strike wings deployed and holding. A formation that had not been assembled in the time it took the Resk fleet to transit the gas column. A formation that had been in place before Thale had entered the drift, before the contact vanished, before the hunt began. The pale meridian sat at the near edge of the formation, its hull visible on direct optics at 11,000 kilometers. It was not a large ship by Terran standards. Sleek, low profile, its hull marked by transit scoring, and the specific kind of surface where that came from extended stealth operations in abrasive particle environments. It looked exactly like what the Dominion Council files had described. A Ghost-class cruiser, moderate tonnage, limited offensive armament. It looked nothing like what Thale now understood it to be. The tight beam transmission arrived 30 seconds after the fleet appeared on his display. 11 words, the same format as before. Sub-Commander Thale, you followed. That was the right decision. His weapons officer said at barely a whisper, Sub-Commander, orders. Thale looked at 340 warships, at the formation that had been waiting here while he spent 9 hours hunting something that was not running, at the pale meridian sitting at the center of it with no urgency in its positioning, because there was no urgency required. He looked at his own fleet, 37 ships, sensors still partially blinded by the gas column transit, weapons armed against a target profile that had been obsolete for at least 9 hours. Stand down weapons, he said. Sir. Stand down. He kept his voice level. Open a channel to the Terran Formation Command. There was a silence in the combat operations room that he could feel in the ventilation. The same silence he had sat in for 9 hours while the pale meridian watched his fleet from 12,000 kilometers and decided whether he was worth communicating with. The channel opened. The voice on the other end was young. Not the cadence of a veteran fleet commander, young in the particular way that implied certainty without age behind it, the way a hunter sounds when it has already read the terrain. She gave her name and her ship and then said 3 sentences. Your fleet is intact. My fleet will hold position. This channel stays open as long as you want it. Thale did not immediately respond. He was looking at the tactical display, running the geometry he had been running for the past 22 minutes. The pale meridian's course during the 9-hour disappearance, the heading it had given him, the transit corridor through the gas column. He had assumed the corridor was the only viable path through the dense region. He now understood, with the clarity of something becoming obvious only in retrospect, that the corridor was also the only approach vector that left a Resk fleet blind for 22 minutes while a Terran formation completed its encirclement. The heading was not an invitation. It was the final move of a geometry that had been set 11 days ago, when the pale meridian first entered the drift. He opened his response channel. The commander of the pale meridian, you had 9 hours. A pause, then, yes. In 9 hours, you could have destroyed this fleet. Another pause, shorter, yes. You chose to transmit instead. The answer came without pause. That was always the point, Sub-Commander. He thought about the Dominion Council's intercept order. He thought about the 37 ships behind him, crews at battle stations, weapons standing down on his authority alone. He thought about a 27-year-old human officer who had spent 11 days positioning her ship in Resk space, 9 hours moving through a hunting fleet undetected, and 22 minutes leading that fleet through a gas column at the only pace that allowed 340 warships to complete their encirclement, all to deliver a message that could have been transmitted from the drift's edge without any of it. The message was not in the 11 words. The message was in the 9 hours. He transmitted fleet-wide on the Resk command band. Log the engagement. The pale meridian established contact and maintained surveillance for 9 hours without detection. Log 0 hostile action during that period. He paused. Then transmit to Dominion Council. We are transmitting the Terran formation data and requesting revised orders. Do not recommend engagement. His fleet master, senior to him by 2 ranks, stationed at the formation's aft anchor position, said nothing for 11 seconds. Then, transmitting as ordered, Sub-Commander. He left the Terran channel open. He did not speak again on it, and neither did the pale meridian. The revised orders arrived 4 hours later. The Resk hunting fleet withdrew on a heading that took it away from the drift, the 340 Terran warships holding their formation and tracking the departure without closing. The pale meridian did not pursue. It held its position at the drift's near edge, its hull small against the formation arrayed behind it, its passive sensors no doubt logging every Resk transponder beacon as it moved away. Thale filed his engagement report during the transit. He noted the thermal band. He noted the 11-second sensor gap. He noted the hull mass shadow that had been behind his fleet's position for an unknown duration before the main contact vanished. He noted the corridor transit and the formation waiting at the exit point. He noted the 2 transmissions, both 11 words, both type beam, neither carrying any weapon tone. He noted at the end of the report his own assessment. The pale meridian had not been evading the hunt. It had been running it. Every position his fleet had taken, it had directed. Every silence had been chosen. The 9 hours had not been concealment. They had been communication, the slow, patient kind that demonstrated something no transmission could carry on its own. He classified the assessment under a category the Dominion's archive did not have a sub-entry for, and left a note for the archivist that a new one would be needed. He did not name the category. Some things communicated their own definitions, and the archive would understand eventually. The drift closed behind the fleet. The pale meridian's transponder signal held steady on his passive display for 312,000 kilometers, visible at the edge of sensor range, holding position in the dark the way something holds position that knows it does not have to move. Thale watched it until the range exceeded his passive grid's threshold, and then he watched the empty coordinate where it had been. He had been in that space too once, 9 hours ago. The difference was that he had not known he was being watched.